In the eyes of Lagos high society, he was just a poor driver, a single father who kept his head down before his wealthy employer who enjoyed humiliating others. When the woman invited him to her lavish birthday party, everyone understood it was not kindness, but a cruel joke. They waited for the moment he would fumble, humiliated, laughed at among the rich crowd. But that evening, when Sadi walked into the ballroom with his 8-year-old daughter, wearing a vest designed and tailored by his own hands, the entire room fell silent. Who could have guessed the poor driver they meant to mock was the talented designer who once stunned Paris Fashion Week 3 years ago? The black sedan rolled through the congested streets of Lagos, its tinted windows shielding the air-conditioned interior from the afternoon heat. Sadi kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel, while Erdon Bello lounged in the back seat, scrolling through her phone. She had been his employer for 2 years now, and in that time he had learned to anticipate her moods the way a sailor reads the sky before a storm. Today she was in high spirits, which usually meant someone was about to become her entertainment. Her laughter punctuated the quiet hum of the engine as she spoke into her phone, her voice dripping with confidence that came from never having to worry about consequences. Sadi recognized the tone. It was the same one she used when selecting which employee to humiliate in front of clients at her chain of upscale fashion boutiques. "Darling, you have to come," Aiden said into the phone, her manicured nails tapping against the leather seat. "I am inviting absolutely everyone. The cream of Lagos society. It is going to be unforgettable." She laughed again, a sharp sound. "Oh, and I am inviting some very special guests, too. You will see what I mean." The car slowed to a stop outside one of the designer stores that dotted Victoria Island, the kind of place where a single handbag cost more than Sadi made in 3 months. He stepped out and opened her door with practiced efficiency. Aiden emerged without a glance in his direction, already focused on the storefront windows displaying gowns that shimmered like captured starlight. Before she disappeared inside, she turned back to him with that particular smile he had come to dread. It was not cruel exactly, but calculating, treating people like pieces on a chessboard. Her eyes swept over him, taking in his simple white shirt and dark trousers, the uniform of his invisibility. "Sadi," she called out, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "My birthday party is next Saturday. I want you to attend." The words hung in the air between them. Sadi felt something shift in his chest, a warning bell that rang distant but insistent. In 2 years of driving her to parties, galas, and social events, she had never once suggested he should attend one. He was part of the machinery that made her life run smoothly, as invisible as the engine of the car he drove. "Mom?" he said, his voice carefully measured. Aiden's smile widened. "You heard me correctly. I want you there. Everyone around me is so wealthy, so predictable. I want to add some variety to the guest list. Some real people. You understand?" The way she said real people made it clear she meant the opposite. "You will come, won't you? Just make sure you dress nicely. I would hate for you to embarrass me." Through the phone still pressed to her ear, Sadi could hear laughter from whoever was on the other end. They understood the joke, even if the punchline had not been spoken aloud yet. He was being invited not as a guest, but as entertainment, a curiosity to be displayed and mocked, proof of Aiden's power to summon even the lowest rungs of society to her celebration. Sadi met her eyes and saw the challenge there, the assumption that he would either refuse and confirm his cowardice or accept and provide her with exactly the spectacle she wanted. He had learned long ago that silence was often the best response to cruelty, so he simply nodded once before returning to the driver's seat. The sun was setting by the time he pulled up to the small apartment building where he lived with his daughter. The neighborhood was not dangerous, but it was not comfortable either, the kind of place where people worked hard and still struggled to make ends meet. Sadi climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor, his legs heavy with fatigue. When he opened the door, Zara looked up from her homework at the small dining table. At 8 years old, she had her mother's eyes and her father's quiet determination. She smiled when she saw him, and for a moment the weight of the day lifted. This was why he did it, why he swallowed his pride and drove Aidan bellow around the city. Everything he did was for the little girl who looked at him like he hung the moon. "How was school?" Sadie asked, moving to the small kitchen to start dinner. "Good," Zara replied, but she was watching him with that perceptive intensity that children sometimes have. "Daddy, what is wrong?" He should have known better than to think he could hide anything from her. Sadie came back to the table and sat down. For a long moment he considered not telling her, but Zara deserved honesty. She had already lost her mother 3 years ago. "My employer invited me to a birthday party," he said finally. Zara's face brightened. "That is nice. You should go." "It is not that simple, sweetheart." Sadie chose his words carefully. "I do not think she invited me because she wants me there. I think she wants to make fun of me in front of her friends, to show everyone that she is so powerful she can even make her driver come to her party and feel small." Zara frowned, her small hands curling into fists on the table. "That is mean. Why would she do that? Some people need to make others feel small so they can feel big," Sadie said quietly. "And when you are in my position, sometimes you just have to accept that and move on." But Zara shook her head, her jaw set in a way that reminded Sadie painfully of her mother. "You always tell me to be proud of who I am. You say that nobody can make me feel bad about myself unless I let them." She looked at him with those wide, serious eyes. "Are you scared, Daddy?" The question hit harder than any of Aidan's cutting remarks. Sadie looked at his daughter and saw himself reflected back, all the compromises he had made in the name of stability and safety. He had spent 2 years bowing his head and accepting his place, telling himself it was noble to endure for the sake of his child. But what was he teaching her by doing that? "Maybe I am a little scared," he admitted. Not of her, but of what it will feel like to stand in a room full of people who think they are better than me. Zara reached across the table and put her small hand on his. "But, Daddy, if you do not go, she will think you are scared of her. And that is worse. Is it not? That is when she really wins." Out of the mouths of children came a clarity that adults spent lifetimes trying to recapture. She was right. If he stayed away, Aidan would tell everyone that her driver had been too intimidated to show up. The humiliation would be complete without him ever setting foot in the ballroom. After Zara went to bed, Sadie sat alone in the small living room and stared at the old suitcase he kept under his bed. He had not opened it in 3 years, not since the funeral, not since he had packed away that entire part of his life and accepted that it was over. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled it out and unlatched the clasps. Inside were the remnants of another life, sketches and fabric swatches, photos from fashion shows, a worn leather portfolio with his name embossed in gold lettering that had faded with time. Sadie had been someone once, not Aidan Bellow's driver, not just Zara's father, but himself, whole and complete and recognized for his talent. The world had known him as S. Adewale, the Nigerian designer who had taken Paris Fashion Week by storm 3 years ago with a collection that celebrated simplicity. Critics had called him a genius. Magazines had featured him. He had been on the verge of everything he had ever dreamed of. Then his wife got sick. The cancer came fast and merciless, and suddenly Paris and fashion and his rising career meant nothing compared to being there for her final months. He had come back to Lagos, put away his sketching pencils, and focused only on making her comfortable and preparing Zara for a loss no child should face. After she died, he told himself he would return to design eventually. But fashion was unstable, full of feast and famine, and Zara needed stability. She needed regular meals and school fees paid on time and a father who came home every evening. So he had taken the job as a driver. It was steady. It was reliable. It was safe. And it was killing something inside him, piece by piece, day by day. Sadi pulled out one of his old sketch pads and flipped through pages of designs he had never completed. He had been good at this once, more than good, and somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the compromises and the constant bowing of his head, he still was. A plan began to form in his mind, audacious and terrifying and perfectly clear. If he was going to walk into Aidan Bellow's party, he would not do it in borrowed finery or cheap imitations. He would do it in his own design, something he created with his own hands. He would walk in not as her driver, but as himself, fully and completely, and let the world see what she had tried so hard to make invisible. He would bring Zara with him. She deserved to see that her father was more than what he had become, that he had not always been the man who accepted insults with silent nods. And maybe she would learn something about worth that no lecture could teach. The suitcase remained open on the floor, its contents spread around him like the pieces of a puzzle he had abandoned halfway through. Sadi looked at his reflection in the darkened window and barely recognized the man staring back. But somewhere beneath the tiredness and resignation, there was still a spark of who he used to be. It was time to see if that spark could become a flame again. The week that followed moved in a strange rhythm, days blurring into nights as Sadi worked 2 jobs instead of 1. By daylight, he remained Aidan's driver, ferrying her between boutiques and lunch appointments while she discussed party preparations with obsessive enthusiasm. By night, he became someone else entirely, hunched over the small dining table with fabric and thread, his hands remembering skills they had not practiced in years. Zara appointed herself his assistant without being asked. She would sit across from him after finishing her homework, watching with fascination as he sketched and measured and cut. Sometimes she would hand him pins or hold fabric taut while he worked. Other times she simply sat in companionable silence, working on her own drawings while he brought his vision to life. "What color should my dress be?" she asked on the 3rd night, her crayon moving across the page in careful strokes. Sadi looked up from the vest he was constructing, grey fabric spread across the table like a calm sea. "What color do you want it to be?" "Something that makes me look like I belong with you," Zara said simply. The words settled in Sadi's chest with unexpected weight. He set down his needle and really looked at his daughter, this small person who somehow understood what he was trying to do better than he understood it himself. She did not want to stand out or draw attention. She wanted to stand beside him as an equal. "How about we use the leftover fabric?" Sadi suggested, gesturing to the scraps of traditional Nigerian textile he had found at the bottom of his suitcase. "We can make something that connects us, something that shows we are a team." Zara's smile could have lit the entire neighborhood. For the next hour they worked together, Sadi showing her how to pin pattern pieces and explaining why certain cuts would drape better than others. She absorbed every word with intensity, her small fingers careful and deliberate as she helped him work. "Daddy?" she said at one point, her voice soft with wonder. "You are really good at this." "I used to be," Sadi replied, threading his needle with practiced precision. "No," Zara insisted with the certainty that only children possess. "You still are. You just forgot for a little while." Maybe she was right. Maybe talent was not something that disappeared, but something that waited, patient and eternal, for you to remember it existed. As the vest took shape under his hands, Sadi felt muscle memory awakening in his fingers. The way fabric moved and fell, the precise angle needed for a lapel, the dozens of tiny decisions that separated adequate tailoring from something transcendent. He had learned this craft from his grandmother, who had learned it from her mother, a long line of seamstresses and tailors stretching back through generations. Fashion school in Paris had given him theory and exposure, but this knowledge ran deeper than education. It was in his blood, in the careful attention his hands paid to every stitch. The vest began as simple grey wool, understated and classic. But as Sadi worked, it transformed into something more. The cut was perfect, each seam invisible, the structure so precise it would move with the body as if it had been grown rather than sewn. There was no embellishment, no flash, nothing to announce itself. The statement was in the craftsmanship itself. By Thursday night, his back ached from hunching over the table and his eyes burned from working in dim light, but the vest was finished. Sadi held it up and examined it from every angle, searching for flaws and finding none. When he tried it on in front of the small bathroom mirror, he barely recognized himself. The man looking back was not Aidan Bellows' driver. He was not even S. Adewale from the fashion magazines. He was something in between, something that contained both identities and refused to choose. The vest fit like a second skin, transforming his posture, making him stand straighter without conscious effort. Zara's dress came together more quickly. Sadi used the traditional Nigerian textile to create something that honored their heritage without becoming costume. The result was a simple dress with clean lines and subtle details, something a child could move in comfortably while still looking purposeful and cared for. When Zara tried it on Friday evening, she spun in a circle and the fabric moved with her like water. "We look like we belong together," she announced, studying their reflection side by side in the mirror. "We do," Sadi agreed, and meant it in more ways than she probably understood. Saturday arrived with Lagos traffic and relentless sunshine. Sadi drove Aidan to her final preparation appointments, listening to her chatter about ice sculptures and champagne selections with half his attention, while the other half remained focused on the evening ahead. She was in an exceptionally good mood, which meant the trap was set, and she was anticipating the spring. "You are still planning to come tonight, are you not, Sadi?" Aidan asked at one point, catching his eye in the rearview mirror with that particular smile he had come to despise. "Yes, ma'am," he replied evenly. "Wonderful," she purred. "I have told all my friends about my special guest. They are very curious to meet you." The words were designed to make him squirm, to remind him that he would be walking into a room full of people who had already been primed to view him as entertainment. Sadi kept his expression neutral and his hands steady on the wheel, giving her nothing to work with. Let her think he was too simple to understand the game she was playing. By the time he dropped her at the hotel where the party would be held, Sadi's heart was beating hard enough that he wondered if she could hear it. But his voice remained calm as he confirmed what time she wanted him to return on Monday, and his face betrayed nothing as she swept away without a backward glance. He drove home and found Zara already dressed and waiting, her hair carefully braided by the neighbor who sometimes watched her. She had taken it upon herself to shine both their shoes until they gleamed, an attention to detail that made Sadi's throat tight. They dressed together in companionable silence, Zara helping him with his cufflinks while he adjusted the small collar of her dress. "Are you nervous?" she asked as they stood together in front of the mirror one final time. "Terrified," Sadi admitted, seeing no point in lying. "Me too," Zara said, slipping her small hand into his. "But we are going to be brave together, right?" "Right," Sadi agreed, squeezing her hand gently. They took a taxi to the hotel, Sadi unwilling to arrive in the same car he used to chauffeur Aidan around. The driver made small talk about traffic and weather, while Sadi stared out the window and tried to control his breathing. Beside him, Zara sat quietly, her hand never leaving his, her presence an anchor that kept him from floating away into panic. The hotel blazed with light. its entrance crowded with luxury cars and guests in evening wear. Sadi paid the taxi driver and stepped out onto the sidewalk, acutely aware of the looks they were already receiving. A doorman in pristine uniform opened the door with a polite nod, his professional mask slipping for just a moment as he took in the vest Sadi wore. The lobby was even more intimidating than Sadi remembered, all marble and gold, and the kind of hushed elegance that made normal conversation feel like shouting. Signs directed party guests to the grand ballroom on the second floor. Sadi and Zara followed the flow of people, moving through a gauntlet of wealth and privilege that seemed designed to remind them they did not belong. But something strange happened as they walked. People looked at them, but not with the dismissive glances Sadi had expected. Their eyes lingered on his vest, on the precise cut and impeccable tailoring, trying to place the designer. They noticed Zara's dress, the way it complemented without copying, the subtle coordination that spoke of thoughtfulness and care. By the time they reached the ballroom entrance, Sadi could feel curious eyes following them. The massive doors stood open, revealing a space that looked like something from a fever dream. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables draped in silk. Flower arrangements the size of small trees punctuated the room. A string quartet played softly in one corner, while waiters circulated with champagne and canapes. And in the center of it all stood Aidan Bellow, resplendent in a gown that must have cost thousands, holding court among her friends like a queen among courtiers. She was mid-laugh when she noticed the new arrivals, her expression freezing for just a moment before smoothing back into practiced charm. Sadi took a breath and walked in, Zara's hand still clasped in his. The room did not fall silent all at once. It was more gradual than that, a spreading awareness that moved through the crowd like ripples on water. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The quartet continued playing, but somehow the music seemed distant, muffled by the weight of all those eyes. They were not looking at a poor driver who had stumbled into a space above his station. They were looking at a man in a vest so perfectly tailored it could only be bespoke, walking with quiet confidence beside a child whose dress whispered of careful attention and artistic sensibility. They were looking at something that did not match the script Aidan had prepared for them. Sadi made his way through the crowd toward Aidan, aware of the space that opened around him as people stepped back to let him pass. Their faces held curiosity now, instead of contempt, confusion instead of anticipated mockery. He reached Aidan and inclined his head politely, his voice calm and measured when he spoke. "Good evening, Mrs. Bellow. Thank you for inviting us." Adon's smile looked like it had been painted on, bright and brittle. "Sadi, you came. How wonderful." Her eyes flickered over his vest, over Zara's dress, searching for something to criticize and finding nothing obvious. "You look very nice. Did you rent that?" "I made it," Sadi replied simply. The words landed in the space between them with unexpected weight. Arden's smile flickered, uncertainty crossing her face for the first time since Sadi had known her. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, drawn by the strange energy of this exchange. "You made it," Arden repeated, her tone suggesting she did not quite believe him. "How clever. I suppose everyone needs a hobby." Before Sadi could respond, a woman detached herself from a nearby group and approached with purposeful stride. She was elegant in an understated way, her dress expensive but not ostentatious, her jewelry minimal. Sadi recognized her face from magazine covers. Kioma Bradford, editor of one of Lagos's premier fashion publications. "Excuse me," Kioma said, her attention entirely on Sadi. "I could not help but notice your vest. May I ask where you got it?" "I made it myself," Sadi said again, and this time the words felt less like confession and more like declaration. Kioma's eyes widened slightly. She moved closer, examining the vest with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years evaluating craftsmanship. Her fingers hovered near the lapel, but she did not touch, respecting the boundary between admiration and presumption. When she looked up, there was excitement in her expression. "The cut is extraordinary. The proportion, the way it sits on the shoulder, the invisible seam work." She studied him intently. "You are a tailor." "I was a designer," Sadie said, and felt Zara squeeze his hand in encouragement. "I am a driver now." "A driver," Kioma repeated slowly, as if tasting the word and finding it strange. Her gaze sharpened, moving from the vest to Sadie's face and back again. Something clicked in her expression. "Wait, this construction technique, the minimalist aesthetic, the precision." Her voice rose with sudden recognition. "S. Adewale, Paris Fashion Week 2022, the Dignity Collection. That was you." The name hung in the air like a bell that had been struck, its resonance spreading through the ballroom in widening circles. Sadie heard gasps, saw people pulling out their phones, fingers flying as they searched for confirmation. Within seconds, images would be flooding their screens. A younger Sadie standing backstage at Paris Fashion Week. Models wearing his designs down runways, headlines praising the Nigerian designer who had brought something fresh and meaningful to an industry drowning in excess. Ardon's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. This was not the script. This was not the humiliated driver fumbling among his betters. This was something else entirely, something she had not anticipated and could not control. "That cannot be right," Aiden said, her voice sharp with something that might have been panic. "He is my driver. He has been for 2 years. He cannot be some famous designer." But Kioma was not listening to her. Her attention remained locked on Sadie, wonder and confusion mixing in her expression. "You vanished. Everyone wondered what happened to you. Why would you give up everything to become a driver?" Sadie looked down at Zara, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes, and then back at Kioma. The truth was simple, even if the reasons were complex. "My wife died," he said quietly. "I had a daughter to raise. Fashion is unpredictable. Driving is steady." The honesty of it seemed to hit Kioma like a physical blow. Around them, the crowd had gone completely silent now, everyone straining to hear this unexpected story. These were people used to scandal and gossip, but this was different. This was a man who had walked away from success for love, who had traded fame for stability, who had chosen his child over his career. "And the vest?" Kioma asked softly. "Is what I can still do," Sadie replied. "Even now." The next 30 minutes unfolded like a fever dream. Sadie found himself surrounded by Lagos elite, who suddenly saw him as something other than invisible. They asked questions about Paris, about his techniques, about why he had disappeared. Kioma stayed close, as if afraid he might vanish again if she looked away. Someone pressed a business card into his hand, then another, then 3 more. Zara stayed anchored to his side through all of it, her small hand never leaving his, her eyes wide as she watched her father become someone she had never quite seen before. Not the quiet man who made her breakfast and helped with homework, but someone who spoke with authority about construction and drape, whose opinions were suddenly valued. Across the ballroom, Aiden stood alone beside her elaborate birthday cake, watching her carefully orchestrated humiliation transform into something she could not control. Her friends had abandoned her orbit, drawn instead to the unexpected gravity of the man she had invited as a joke. The whispers had already started, speculation about why she would keep a talented designer working as her driver. "This is unbelievable," a man in an expensive suit said, studying Sadie's vest from every angle. "The precision of the tailoring is museum quality. You did this by hand?" "Most of it," Sadie confirmed, his voice steady, despite the surreal nature of standing in this ballroom, being treated like someone who mattered. "I have a basic sewing machine at home, but the detailed work requires hand stitching. Kioma had been quiet for several minutes, scrolling through something on her phone with increasing intensity. When she looked up, her expression held a mixture of excitement and determination. "I want to interview you for the magazine," she announced. "A full feature, the return of S. Adewale, the story of why you left, what you have been doing. People need to hear this." The offer hung in the air, heavy with possibility and danger. Sadi felt the familiar pull of the old life, the world of shows and press and validation that he had walked away from. But he also felt Zara's hand in his, a reminder of why he had made that choice in the first place. "I appreciate the offer," Sadi began carefully, but Kioma cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Before you say no, just think about it. You do not have to go back to the chaos of fashion weeks and international shows, but you have a gift, and gifts like yours should not be hidden away because you are driving someone around the city all day." Her eyes flickered toward Aidan, who was now attempting to regain control of her party by loudly suggesting people should eat, especially not for someone who clearly does not appreciate what she has. Around them, other guests were nodding in agreement. A woman who owned several high-end boutiques mentioned she would pay premium prices for custom pieces. A stylist said he had clients who would be thrilled to wear Adewale originals. The offers kept coming, each one representing a door that Sadi thought he had closed forever. But with each offer came the same underlying assumption that he would need to return to the life he had left behind. Long hours, unpredictable income, the constant pressure to produce and perform and prove himself worthy of attention. "Daddy," Zara said quietly, her voice somehow carrying in the chaos around them. "Your eyes are shining again." The observation landed with unexpected force. Sadi realized she was right. Something in him had woken up tonight, something that had been sleeping for 3 years while he convinced himself that safety was the same as living. "I need to think about this," Sadi said to Kioma, his voice gentle but firm. "These are generous offers, but I have to consider what is best for my daughter." Kioma nodded with what looked like understanding, though her eyes held the gleam of someone who was not used to taking no for an answer. "Of course, but please do think about it. The world needs what you can create." The crowd around them began to disperse as waiters announced dinner was being served. Sadi found himself standing in a small pocket of relative quiet, Zara still beside him, his mind spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. "We should probably go," Sadi said to Zara, suddenly aware that they had been there for over an hour. "You have school on Monday and it is getting late." But before they could move toward the exit, Aidan appeared in front of them. Her smile was brittle, her eyes hard with something that might have been anger or might have been fear. Up close, Sadi could see the tension in her jaw, the careful control she was exerting to maintain her composure. "Leaving so soon?" Arden asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But you are the star of the evening. Everyone wants to talk to my talented driver." The emphasis on the last word was deliberate, a reminder of his place that fell flat given everything that had happened. "Thank you for inviting us," Sadi replied with genuine politeness. "It has been a memorable evening." Aidan's smile tightened further. Around them, a few guests had stopped to watch this exchange with barely concealed interest. She was trapped between maintaining her public facade and expressing the rage that was clearly building behind her eyes. "You know," she said, her voice dropping lower, "you work for me. On Monday you will still be my driver. All of this," she gestured vaguely at the room, at the people who had swarmed him, "does not change that." It was meant to put him back in his place, to remind him that despite tonight's unexpected turn, she still held power over his employment and therefore his ability to support his daughter. The threat was clear, even if unspoken. Sadi looked at her for a long moment, this woman who had invited him here to be humiliated. who had underestimated him so completely. She had handed him the very weapon that destroyed her plan. "Actually, Mrs. Bello, I will not be your driver on Monday, or any day after that. I am giving my notice effective immediately." The words came out calm and clear, without anger or triumph, just simple statement of fact. Aidan's face went through several expressions in rapid succession before settling on fury that she could no longer quite hide behind her social mask. "You cannot just quit," she hissed, glancing around to see who was listening. "You have a contract. You have responsibilities. My contract allows for 2 weeks' notice or payment in lieu," Sadi replied, his voice still calm. "I will forfeit the 2 weeks' pay. Consider this my resignation." He could see her calculating, trying to find an angle that would let her salvage something from this disaster. But there was nothing left to salvage. "Fine," Aidan spat, abandoning any pretense of grace. "Walk away. But do not expect any references from me. Do not expect anyone in Lagos to hire you after you abandoned your employer without proper notice." "I do not think he will need your references," Kioma interjected smoothly, appearing at Sadi's elbow with perfect timing. "I imagine S. Adewale will have more opportunities than he knows what to do with." The comment drew a few scattered laughs from the watching crowd. Ardon's face flushed red, and for a moment Sadi thought she might actually lose control completely. But she was too practiced at maintaining appearances, even in defeat. She turned on her heel and stalked away, leaving them standing in the wreckage of her failed joke. They left the hotel an hour later, Sadi's pockets heavy with business cards and his head spinning with possibilities. The night air felt cool after the overheated ballroom, and Lagos stretched out before them in all its chaotic glory. Sadi hailed a taxi and gave his address, then sat back and tried to process everything that had just happened. "That was amazing," Zara said, her voice vibrating with excitement. "Did you see her face when you quit? And all those people wanted to hire you." "I saw," Sadi replied, though the memory already felt distant and slightly unreal. "But Zara, you understand what this means, right? I do not have a job anymore. We still need to pay rent. We still need to eat." Zara turned to look at him with those serious eyes that were too old for her age. "But you are going to design again, right? You are not going to just find another driving job?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Sadi realized his daughter was asking him to take a leap that terrified him, to trust that the talent he had buried for 3 years could actually sustain them. "I do not know yet," Sadi admitted. "I need to think about it carefully. Figure out what makes sense." But even as he said it, he knew what he was going to do. The week spent creating that vest had reminded him of who he was beneath the compromises and the fear. The following week moved with strange momentum. Kioma's interview appeared in the magazine 3 days later, a full spread with photos from the Paris show and new ones of Sadi at his small dining table with his sewing machine. The headline read, "The designer who chose love, S. Adewale returns." The response was immediate and overwhelming. His phone, which had rarely rung before, now went off constantly with calls from boutique owners, private clients, and fashion school administrators. The offers ranged from reasonable to absurd, but they all shared one assumption, that he would return to the chaos of full-time fashion work. Sadi sat at that same dining table where he had created the vest and spread out all the business cards and proposals. Zara did her homework across from him, occasionally looking up to offer opinions on which logos looked most professional. "What if I do not take any of them?" Sadi asked her, speaking the fear that had been growing in his chest. "What if I try to do this my own way and it fails?" Zara looked up from her math homework and considered the question with seriousness. "What if you do not try and spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened?" Out of the mouths of children came wisdom that took adults decades to learn. Sadi looked at his daughter and saw not just the person he was trying to protect, but the person who was watching him to learn how to live. What was he teaching her by choosing safety over passion? The answer came not in a flash of insight, but in a slow certainty that built over days. He would not return to the old model of fashion design, the endless shows and international travel and pressure to produce collection after collection. Instead, he would create something new, something that fit the life he wanted to live. He converted the small second bedroom of their apartment into a studio. He bought a better sewing machine with money from his first commission, a custom suit for a tech entrepreneur who had been at the party. He turned down the teaching positions and the boutique contracts and instead worked from home, taking on select projects that interested him and paid well enough to cover their expenses. The transition was not smooth. There were weeks when work dried up and he worried about making rent. There were nights when he sat at the table and wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. But there were also mornings when he woke up excited about the project on his work table, and evenings when he and Zara would sit together sketching ideas. 3 months after the party, Sedi debuted a small collection at Lagos Fashion Week. Just 12 pieces, each one created with the same obsessive attention to detail he had put into that grey vest. The collection was titled Roots and Wings, an exploration of the balance between stability and freedom, between honoring where you came from and allowing yourself to grow. The show was not the biggest or most elaborate, but it was his, done on his terms at a pace that allowed him to still pick Zara up from school and help with her homework. The reviews were glowing. Orders came in. More importantly, he felt alive in a way he had not since before his wife died. 6 months after that night at the hotel, Sadi found himself at another fashion event, this one a gala fundraiser for arts education. He was there as a guest rather than staff, wearing a new vest he had made in deep charcoal with almost invisible stitching. Zara was at a sleepover with friends, giving him a rare evening out alone. He was examining a sculpture when he felt someone approach. Turning, he found himself face to face with Aidan Bellow. She looked smaller than he remembered, her confidence worn down by the month since her birthday disaster. The whispers about her treatment of talented staff had damaged her reputation more than she had probably anticipated. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them like smoke. Finally, Aidan spoke, her voice lacking its usual edge. "Your collection was beautiful. I saw the reviews." "Thank you," Sadi replied, genuinely surprised she was speaking to him at all. Another silence stretched between them. Aidan looked like she was wrestling with something, her usual mask of superiority cracking enough to show the uncertainty beneath. "I owe you an apology," she said finally, the words clearly costing her something. "For everything. The party, the way I treated you, all of it. I thought I was proving something, but I was just being cruel." Sadi studied her, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, but found only what appeared to be genuine regret. People were rarely entirely villains or heroes. They were complicated and flawed, and sometimes capable of recognizing their mistakes. "I accept your apology," he said simply, "and thank you for the invitation to that party. It changed my life." The irony was not lost on either of them. Aidan had invited him to humiliate him, and instead had given him the push he needed to reclaim his life. "I suppose everyone deserves a second chance," Aidan said softly. "They do," Sadi agreed, and meant it. She nodded once and walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Sadi looked around the gallery at the beautiful people in beautiful clothes, the same type of crowd that had gathered at that birthday party. But he was not there as a driver or as a curiosity. He was there as himself, fully and completely, with nothing to prove and nothing to hide. Later that night, after the gala ended and he had returned to his apartment, Sadi stood in the doorway of Zara's room and watched her sleep. She had one arm thrown over her stuffed elephant, her face peaceful in the dim light from the hallway. This was why he did everything. Not for the reviews or the commissions or the validation, but for the little girl who deserved a father who was whole and happy and fully present. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from Paris to grief to driving to that pivotal moment at the party. Every step had been necessary. Every loss and compromise had taught him something essential. He had learned what really mattered. He had learned the difference between safety and stagnation. Sadi closed the door softly and moved to his studio, where a half-finished jacket waited on his work table. He sat down and picked up his needle, letting the familiar rhythm of stitching calm his mind. Tomorrow Zara would wake up and they would have breakfast together before school. Tomorrow he would work on commissions and maybe sketch some new ideas. Tomorrow would be ordinary and extraordinary in equal measure, which was exactly what he had built all of this to achieve. The world had invited him to be humiliated, and he had turned it into transformation. They had expected a poor driver and discovered a designer. But most importantly, he had rediscovered himself. Not as he had been in Paris or as he had become in grief, but as someone new who contained all of those experiences and chose to move forward anyway. Worth was not about never being knocked down. It was about deciding over and over again to stand back up with your head high and your hands ready to create something beautiful from the wreckage. It was about knowing your value even when others tried to diminish it. It was about teaching your daughter, through actions rather than words, that you could honor your responsibilities and your dreams at the same time. Sadi stitched late into the night, his hands steady, his mind clear, his heart finally at peace with the man he had become and the life he had chosen. The joke had been on Aidan after all, but the punchline was not about revenge or triumph. It was simply this: you could not truly humiliate someone who refused to be ashamed of who they were. And Sadi was not ashamed. Not of being a driver when that was what his daughter needed. Not of being a designer when that was what his soul required. Not of being a father above all else, building a life that honored both roots and wings, both stability and flight. He was simply himself, and that was enough.